The night was thick with silence, broken only by the low hum of machinery deep inside USS Washington. In a darkened plot room, radar operators leaned over glowing screens as pale green traces began to bloom across the glass. Faint arcs of light that marked something moving through the black water of Ironbottom Sound. They knew what those echoes meant.
We have a contact
An
bearing.
unseen enemy was closing in. Beyond the steel hull, Marines on the Guadalcanal were holding the line by inches, exhausted, hungry, and clinging to Henderson Field, the one strip of land that kept the Pacific War from tipping toward disaster. If the Japanese battleship force reached that airfield, everything the Marines had endured for 3 brutal months could be erased before dawn. But on this night, a different kind of vision mattered. The enemy relied on searchlights and night-trained eyes. The Americans relied on something else, radar, a technology many admirals still distrusted. Only one man in the fleet truly understood its power, Admiral Willis Lee, standing calmly on Washington's bridge as the echoes drew nearer. In 7 minutes, he would prove that radar-guided gunfire could decide the Naval Battle of Guadalcanal and reshape modern naval warfare. Long before the first shells were fired that night, the struggle for Guadalcanal had already carved itself into the memory of every sailor and marine who fought there. What began in August 1942 as a desperate American landing on an unfinished Japanese airstrip had grown into a grinding campaign where heat, disease, and exhaustion claimed almost as many lives as bullets. That airstrip, renamed Henderson Field, became the axis on which the entire Pacific War seemed to tilt. Whoever controlled it controlled the skies. Whoever controlled the skies controlled the sea. And in the island war of the Solomons, that meant everything. By November, the waters around Guadalcanal had earned a name, whispered with bitterness and awe, Ironbottom Sound. Dozens of American and Japanese ships rested on its floor, twisted metal tombs marking the price of each night action. Sailors who passed through could smell fuel on the waves and feel the weight of those who never returned. The earlier battles, Savo Island, Cape Esperance, and the chaotic clash of November 12th and 13th revealed a truth the U.S. Navy was still reluctant to admit. Japan ruled the night.
I understand.
The Imperial Navy had built its doctrine around darkness. Their lookouts were legends. Their torpedoes were unmatched. Their officers trained relentlessly for night attacks. And yet, despite these advantages, something new was beginning to shift the balance. It was not a bigger gun or a faster ship. It was a technology most admirals still viewed with suspicion, radar, a device whose strange green echoes suggested possibilities few truly understood. One officer did. Admiral Willis Lee had spent years studying radar, long before the war started, long before anyone imagined it would guide the guns of a battleship. While others trusted tradition, Lee trusted data. He traveled to laboratories, read technical reports, argued with skeptics, and learned the machinery with the precision of a scientist and the instinct of a seasoned gunnery officer. He saw radar not as an accessory, but as a weapon, one capable of rewriting the rules of naval combat. Yet knowledge alone wasn't enough. In earlier clashes, admirals like Daniel Callaghan and Norman Scott commanded radar-equipped ships, but neither fully embraced the technology. They hesitated, waiting for visual confirmation even when radar showed the enemy's approach. In the smoke and chaos of close-range night fighting, those lost seconds proved fatal. Callaghan died on USS San Francisco. Scott died aboard Atlanta. Their courage was unquestioned, but courage without information could not overcome the darkness. Now, responsibility rested with Lee. Task Force 64, USS Washington, USS South Dakota, and 4 hard-fighting destroyers was all that remained to stop the Japanese bombardment force centered around Battleship Kirishima. If that force reached Henderson Field, the airfield would be shattered, the Marines would be cut off, and the 6-month struggle for Guadalcanal could collapse in a single night. Lee knew the stakes. He knew the sea. And more than any commander before him, he knew how to see through the dark. What he could not know was how much chaos the next hour would bring, or how, in the end, information gathered from a glowing screen would become the sharpest weapon in the Pacific. By 22:30 on November 14th, the darkness over Ironbottom Sound felt almost physical, heavy, warm, and waiting. Deep inside USS Washington, the SG radar began to paint a pattern that every trained operator instantly recognized. Multiple contacts advancing in 2 distinct columns. Bearings, ranges, and speeds rolled across headsets as green blips sharpened into an unmistakable truth. Vice Admiral Kondo's bombardment force was arriving on schedule, and the Americans were outnumbered. Above the plotting tables, Admiral Willis Lee and Captain Glenn Davis absorbed the flow of information with calm precision. Lee had spent years preparing for this moment, not in exercises or theory alone, but in the careful redesign of Washington's communication networks. Radar data now traveled instantly to gunnery teams, directors, and fire control stations. It was a primitive version of what would later become the Combat Information Center, but for tonight, it was enough. Ahead of Washington, 4 American destroyers, Walk, Benham, Preston, and Gwynn, were the first to make contact. The night erupted with 5-inch gunfire as they crossed paths with Japanese destroyers, protecting battleship Kirishima and the cruisers Atago and Takao. In the confusion of spray and darkness, the Japanese unleashed their most feared weapon, the Type 93 Long Lance torpedo. Invisible, wakeless, and devastating, they turned the sea itself into a minefield. Within minutes, Walker was torn apart, Preston was burning, and Benham's bow had been blown away. Gwynn alone limped free. Their sacrifice had bought Washington precious time. But disaster struck within the American line. USS South Dakota, following Washington in column, suffered a cascade of electrical failures, triggered by shock from her own guns. Radar screens went dark. Fire control circuits died. Then, as she drifted too close to the burning wreckage of the destroyed destroyers, Japanese searchlights caught her silhouette. In a heartbeat, nearly every ship in Kondo's force shifted fire. Shells hammered her superstructure, smashing antennas, shredding communications gear, killing dozens. But her armored citadel held firm. While the Japanese poured their fury into South Dakota, Washington vanished into the dark. Lee used the chaos as a shield, steering his battleship along a path where the flames lit one target and concealed another. Washington's radars remained untouched, feeding an unbroken stream of data into her analog fire control computers. Through steel corridors and cramped plotting rooms, Sailors called out bearings and changes in enemy course. And then the moment came. Battleship Kirishima, the core of the Japanese bombardment force, appeared on the SG radar at just 8,400 yards. Point-blank range for 16-inch guns. Captain Davis issued the order. Gun directors locked on. Radar-fed computers calculated trajectories. Sailors at the breech blocks braced themselves as 9 16-inch guns aligned toward a target no one aboard could physically see. At exactly midnight on November 15th, Washington opened fire. The night exploded in white flame. The concussion rolled across the water like a physical force. In the 7 seconds it took for the shells to reach their target, the Japanese still had no visual contact with the American battleship. Then Kirishima shuddered. Hit forward, hit aft, hit amidships! Steering died. Turrets fell silent. Fires roared through her decks. Washington had struck a mortal blow, and the battle was about to turn irrevocably in America's favor. The first salvo had torn through Battleship Kirishima with devastating clarity. Yet for the men aboard her, the enemy remained a phantom. No silhouette on the horizon, no searchlight beam, no muzzle flashes bright enough to mark a target. They felt the ship lurch. They heard the metal scream. But they could see nothing. It was as if the sea itself were striking them. Captain Sanji Iwabuchi ordered his gunners to return fire, but the attempt was futile. Japanese fire control systems depended on optics and visible range markers. Tonight, there were none. Rangefinders searched empty darkness. Lookouts shouted bearings that contradicted one another. Every few seconds, Kirishima's 14-inch guns roared into the night, firing blind, hoping for a lucky hit that never came. Washington, guided entirely by radar, adjusted her course and kept firing. Shell after shell slammed into Kirishima's hull. Some struck her decks and detonated inside the ship, erupting through compartments and sending fire into ammunition rooms. Others splashed short, then continued underwater, hitting below the armor belt where steel was thinner. Flooding spread rapidly through portside spaces. Steering failed first. Then power distribution. Then hydraulic systems feeding the main battery. Within minutes, the Japanese flagship of this night attack was turning in a slow, helpless circle. Aboard Washington, the firing continued with disciplined tempo. Over 7 minutes, the battleship unleashed 75 rounds of 16-inch armor-piercing shells, an astonishing rate of fire for guns of such size. Her 5-inch batteries added their own brutal rhythm, smashing Kirishima's pagoda mast and further crippling fire control positions. By the time Washington ceased fire, the outcome had been sealed. Kirishima was dying. Yet tragedy unfolds slowly aboard a sinking capital ship. Damage control teams fought through fire and choking smoke, trying to counter progressive flooding. Men labored in waist-deep water to shore up bulkheads, already bowing from the weight. On the bridge, officers reported systems failing one by one. Communications crackled, then fell silent. Compartments forward were abandoned. The list increased to 18 degrees. Japanese destroyers, Asagumo and Samidare, raced in to attempt a tow, but the battleship was too far gone. Her flooding was irreversible, her momentum gone, her engines losing strength every minute. Eventually, Captain Iwabuchi gave the order, "No commander ever wants to speak Abandoned ship. In the early hours of November 15th, just after 03 Hankook, the surviving crew climbed down ropes into the night. Many wept in silence as they looked back at their wounded ship, one that had steamed proudly at Pearl Harbor and through years of war, now burning and sinking into the black water of Ironbottom Sound. More than 200 sailors had already died. Kirishima sand added another massive shadow to the graveyard beneath the waves. For Admiral Kondo, the battle was already lost. Without Kirishima's heavy guns, the bombardment of Henderson Field was impossible. His cruisers and destroyers launched final torpedo spreads to cover their retreat, but Washington, still tracking every threat by radar, evaded them with practiced precision. No further Japanese assault would reach the airfield that night. On land, the Marines holding the perimeter never saw the battle that saved them. But when dawn broke and the airfield still stood, they understood that something extraordinary had happened offshore. The cost had been immense for both sides. But in that hour of darkness, the direction of the Pacific War had changed. When news of the night action reached senior commanders, the significance of what had happened off Guadalcanal became immediately clear. For months, the U.S. Navy had struggled through the Solomons, outmaneuvered at night, battered by long-lance torpedoes, and forced to confront a Japanese fleet that excelled in the very conditions where American doctrine had been weakest. But the destruction of Battleship Kirishima by USS Washington, using nothing more than radar data and disciplined fire control, marked a turning point far deeper than the loss of a single ship. Admiral Chester Nimitz studied Admiral Willis Lee's report with characteristic precision. What stood out was not simply the accuracy of Washington's radar-guided gunfire, but the speed with which information had been gathered, processed, and turned into decisive action. Radar had not merely detected the enemy, it had shaped the entire battle. Nimitz understood instantly that this was the future. Within weeks, he ordered accelerated radar installation across the fleet, from battleships to destroyer escorts. New training centers opened in Pearl Harbor and along the U.S. coastline. Radar operators, once overlooked technicians, were suddenly seen as combat specialists whose skills could determine survival. The most transformative innovation, however, was organizational. Before Guadalcanal, radar information lived in scattered compartments: the bridge, the plotting room, the gun directors, each with only part of the picture. Lee's improvised communication network aboard Washington demonstrated how little unity of information could be. From this insight came the formal creation of the Combat Information Center, or CIC. By consolidating sensors, communications, and plotting into a single darkened room deep inside the ship, the U.S. Navy created a nerve center unlike anything seen before in naval warfare. By mid-1943, every major American warship operated with a CIC. By 1944, it was as vital as the bridge. Across the Pacific, the Japanese Navy faced a harsher reckoning. Kondo's after-action reports described an enemy that could see in the dark and strike with precision before Japanese lookouts spotted anything at all. Years of night-fighting doctrine, once the pride of the Imperial Navy, had been overturned in 7 minutes. Japan's radar development existed on paper and in laboratories, but its industrial base was already stretched thin. Producing advanced air electronics at scale was impossible. By the time effective radar sets reached Japanese ships late in the war, the strategic tide had turned irreversibly. Globally, naval strategists took note. The Naval Battle of Guadalcanal demonstrated that information, not visibility, had become the new currency of sea power. The fleet that sensed first, interpreted fastest, and acted with the clearest picture of the battle space would decide the outcome, regardless of numbers or tradition. For the United States, that insight became doctrine. For Japan, it became a warning delivered too late. Conclusion, legacy and reflection. By the time the sun rose over Guadalcanal on November 15th, the waters of Ironbottom Sound were quiet again. Smoke drifted low across the sea. The last echoes of the guns had faded. But something profound had taken place in that darkness, a shift not only in the campaign, but in the very nature of naval warfare. The destruction of Battleship Kirishima, delivered in 7 relentless minutes by USS Washington, had secured Henderson Field, saved the Marines fighting ashore, and altered the course of the Naval Battle of Guadalcanal. Yet its deeper meaning reached far beyond the Solomon Islands. In the months that followed, American shipyards and training centers would embrace the lesson Admiral Willis Lee had demonstrated with unwavering clarity. Technology is not enough unless it is understood, trusted, and mastered. Radar had been present in earlier battles, but only here. Under the calm command of Admiral Willis Lee and the steady coordination of Captain Glenn Davis, did it become a weapon in its own right. The victory belonged not only to the men who stood on the bridge or fired the guns, but to the radar operators whose quiet voices carried the bearings that changed history. Their names rarely appear in official histories. Yet, without them, radar-guided gunfire would have been nothing more than theory. Today, the SG radar set that guided Washington's guns sits in the Smithsonian. Its display explains the specifications, the frequency band, and the role it played in the Pacific War. But the placard does not list the sailors who read its glowing screen that night. It does not tell of the tension in the plot room or the weight of knowing that hundreds of lives depended on each number they spoke. Their contribution, like so many acts of wartime ingenuity, remains largely invisible, yet essential. Perhaps that is the true legacy of the Naval Battle of Guadalcanal, a reminder that history often turns on the work of people whose names we never learn. Men who mastered unfamiliar systems, challenged old assumptions, and looked past the tradition toward a future defined by innovation. Men who understood that information, clear, fast, and trusted, had become the new lifeblood of combat at sea. As we look back on that night, one question lingers. What lessons from Guadalcanal still echo in our world today, and which ones are we in danger of forgetting? If stories like this resonate with you, consider joining us. Share your thoughts below. Tell us what you believe is the enduring lesson of Admiral Willis Lee's triumph, and subscribe to follow our next exploration into the battles that shaped our world.